Good evening and welcome to ANN7 Prime this Sunday evening. My name is Lauren Janae. It's just gone past 6:30 p.m. Let's get straight into the stories that we're following. 4 FNB employees have been fined for sharing political views and a negative comment about opposition leader Mmusi Maimane. According to the Sunday Independent, the bank fired 4 employees from its Inanda branch in Sandton. The bank has accused these employees of gross misconduct, racially based motivated statements that led to the breach of a good faith towards the bank. The bank has also cited an irretrievable breakdown of trust leading to the sacking. The report claims that the 4 employees exchanged several emails and WhatsApp conversations where they spoke against the DA leader Mmusi Maimane. In one of the conversations, one employee says, "I'm shocked Mmusi Maimane's wife is white." Another employee responds, "White voice, white party, white wife. Very soon he will be a Michael Jackson and bleach his skin." In another message, an employee writes, "The imperialists are the ones we should be using our energy and resources because they are milking our country and continent, and they are not remorseful about that. They brutally ruined our land, killing them, our forefathers, and they are still not remorseful about that. Instead, they want us to think they are mentally superior." The 4 sacked employees are crying foul. They say, "I paid a heavy price for exercising my constitutionally guaranteed right to freely express myself. I doubt we would have been dismissed if we had heaped praise on Mmusi Maimane and the DA. Our dismissal was also racially motivated because we had a grievance against a senior white colleague who was victimizing us as we were advocates of transformation within the bank." For more on this, we are joined in our Midrand studios by a panel here live in studio. We are joined by Siphesihle Jele, who is a sacked FNB employee, as well as Simon Masimula, who is also a sacked FNB employee, and then of course our political analyst Tsepo Khadima. A very good evening to you. Thank you guys so much for joining us here on the panel. Let's start first with Mr. Simon Masimula, who has ultimately lost your job regarding this debacle. In your mind, what is the reason for losing your job, and why do you say so?
The reason for actually losing our job was based on the transformation, because we're agents of change with regards to the transformation that is not happening at FNB. So obviously, I used to be the chairperson of Employment Equity Committee, and my friend here used to be a deputy chairperson. So we used to actually raise matters in relation to transformation that FNB was not necessarily taking care of, because obviously, as we know, FNB still remains untransformed even to this age in 2017.
Let's talk about the process that led up to ultimately being fired. What steps were taken by FNB?
What happened is they actually intercepted our emails without us knowing.
Were they office emails?
There were emails. Some of it was WhatsApp, private WhatsApp groups. Some of them it's general talks that we used to actually talk on our emails.
So how did they manage to get access to your private WhatsApp communication?
There was an investigation that was actually carried through.
An investigation?
That's correct.
Okay, and you allowed them to look at your private messages and... Mr. Jele?
Yes. What actually transpired is that we created a WhatsApp group amongst us as employees, which was a decision that we took upon ourselves as employees in that particular team that we were working under in the premium space. So what then happened is that one of the superiors, who was also part of the group, leaked it into management. So he leaked some of the discussions, and most of them were expressed by me, and they're all true. I still stand by everything that I said, and that is written also on the Sunday Independent. They're all true. So upon getting those WhatsApp, they then instituted a disciplinary inquiry by immediately suspending me, and a week later they suspended my fellow employee, former employee here, Paramount. So,
now you claim this has been racially motivated. Why?
it's actually two. It's racially motivated, firstly, and mostly it's politically motivated. The reason I'm saying this is because it is a norm, and each and every employee who works for FNB who's watching this will attest to this. It is a norm that we share stuff and information amongst ourselves using the group email. But I will tell you now, at most cases, and it happened, we had proof, most of the emails that were shared about or against the African National Congress and President Zuma were never made an issue.
That's correct.
But why all of a sudden do you take such difficult stances and wanting employees to pay a price just because they've... and it was even a joke about Musi Maimane.
Now, when you spoke to FNB, leadership regarding this, what was their response?
Their response, firstly, was a heavy suspension of a period of 4 months, if I'm not mistaken, plus or minus. And then we tried via our union, by the name of SASPO, the finance union, to ask them to please intervene because this was not work-related. This was actually politically motivated. So we wanted a political solution to this particular issue. But unfortunately, political leadership in the form of the General Secretary failed us after making a lot of promises, even though the person was represented us very well, we must say. A fellow employee from SASPO by the name of, what's the gentleman's name again? Was it, not Joe?
Well, that's
yes,
fine.
A representative, yes.
And
to be
are
exact.
you going to take any further action?
That's correct. We're going to take any further action. But just to add on the point that was made by my colleague earlier on, the reason we believe that this was politically motivated is because if we had written something that was negative about the African National Congress, we were going to be glorified or even be given a promotion for that matter. But because it was a joke that was linked to a DA, that's why we were actually victimized.
Now let's turn to our political analyst, Tsepo Khadima. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us here once again. Now, from FNB's perspective, they say that their reasoning behind the firing of the employees is due to gross misconduct on a racially based, motivated statement that led to the breach of good faith towards the bank. Ultimately, hearing a bit from both sides now, what is your say on the matter?
Look, what we are seeing is that there is inconsistent application of the code of conduct and the policy of the institution concerned, in this case being First National Bank. And that inconsistency certainly cannot, I think, be able to hold cause in the court of law, which most essentially, I think that's where the aggrieved parties, in this case, these two ex-employees, would most probably have to go to, and they'll have to go to the ends. Here we are seeing an institution, a bank, that the values that they advertise are not always what they live up to. We have a case in point just this past week. The chief executive officer of the bank, no less, went out unprovoked and made a statement that not only will he, in his capacity as the CEO of First National Bank, no longer be flying South African Airways because he is unhappy with what he terms to be political shenanigans at South African Airways, but that he will also go on a campaign to recruit other chief executive officers of other large companies, private companies in South Africa, to follow suit and also not fly South African Airways. Now, if the chief executive officer of an airline such as that one says, of a bank such as First National Bank, says such things, you have to wonder that, well, would there be any other further instructions within the employees of the bank to have done that? But certainly the CEO has been in the political realm. He is playing politics instead of doing banking. And most certainly, that statement brought the bank into disrepute. Now, here it is. Neither the shareholders nor the board of First National Bank ever uttered a word. So it tells you everything that in this country, particularly the corporate sector, they practice odious hypocrisy. And that is one of the things that ought to concern us. And my message to most CEOs that I get to talk to all the time, I warn them, do not be involved in politics. Now, we also need to add that the chief executive of First National Bank is party to the, or rather First Rand, is party to the 81 CEOs, most of those entities or companies largely being members of Business Leadership South Africa, who also signed a petition that President Zuma should step down. And again, there we saw corporate sector being party, political, and playing in the area of politics. Of course, what is to be lamented was the appalling response by the Minister of Finance, who, upon the CEO of First National Bank saying he will no longer be flying South African Airways and that he will recruit other CEOs not to fly South African Airways, that we saw the Minister of Finance actually kowtowing to this nonsense, saying that he will go and meet with the CEO of First National Bank and smoke a peace pipe. Now, that tells you that we have a timid Minister of Finance who at that point in time should have nipped it in the bud, because now it's going to be a flower that we all hate the sight of, that you've got CEOs who are playing in party politics. At that point in time, with the CEO having brought the bank into disrepute, had he called that then he will move that the state should also stop doing business with First National Bank, what would that have meant? And of course, we saw that the shareholders and the board of First National Bank have not done anything. If anything, they are implicit in having brought the bank into disrepute. Now, these former employees, and that's really where the link comes in, that the former employees, it cannot be quantified that they brought this much disrepute onto the bank or this much harm onto the image of the bank, because the communication, although it was political and not having to do with the bank, but private. In any case, it was not out in the public. It would never have been known, and it can't be quantified that this is the harm that it brought upon the bank. But something that is so public, they fail to act upon, but they act upon the defenseless or the weaker party, and that is what is most repugnant about the conduct of FNB.
And we have to pause you there, because we also have Adil Nchabeleng, who is the Transform RSA president. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the phone line. Now, we've obviously heard from FNB's perspective as well as from these two fired FNB employees. From your perspective, do you think it was accurate to fire these employees?
Look, guys, I think good evening to all the listeners. The whole issue is a bit of a really ridiculous issue. I mean, how many emails are going through employees' files on a daily basis in banks? And, you know, for a bank to isolate 2 or so emails and use them as a basis for actually racially discriminating 2 black employees in a bank for the fact that they made a passing remark about the wife of a opposition political leader here being Muslim Maimani's wife, about her being white, and then soon you will have, for instance, you know, black people trying to prove themselves to be a bit white. It's a bit ridiculous. I mean, I didn't expect FNB to stoop this low. But again, it shows us that we still have a huge, long way to go before this country is fully transformed. You know, one of the comments actually come from, I think it's Jelle, when he said that very clearly that, you know, usually employees make all sorts of funny remarks about Zuma. They make all sorts of funny remarks about ANC and black leaders in regard, per se, within the bank. And yet no one has ever been brought to account for making such insidious remarks against black leaders. Here, because, you know, the remark was made against a leader who is a black person, but because the wife was white, the bank felt insulted, and they took up this matter and actually unfairly prosecuted this individual, and as a result lost their job. So I don't think we understand the severity of racism in South Africa, particularly economic racism, where black people will be targeted. You know, what I like in one of the remarks mentioned by the young man was the fact that he actually alluded to key issues. He says, you know, we're employees of a bank, and yet we cannot afford houses. We cannot afford to buy cars on our name. We cannot afford to have decent, lifestyle, and yet we are employed by a wonderful, reputable, one of the top 4 banks in the country. Yet the only reason is because they happen to be black, which means they are earning black wages and black-based salaries. So for us, from a transformer, we are quite actually disturbed, not only about the firing of the two gentlemen, but by the fact that we have banks in South Africa who continue till this day to perpetuate economic racism as well as exclusion on the base of race and color.
Now, in your opinion, how should FNB have dealt with the situation?
I mean, look, if they really wanted to deal with every aspect of an email that goes on in their banks, they would have to go through every single email, which means almost all of the employees of FNB will be fired by today, because we know what goes on in terms of email content. And the content that they actually just picked up in this case was a bit of a ridiculous content. It should not have been allowed to actually be a matter to be brought forward for disciplinary. It had nothing to do with their actually employment status in the bank. It had to do with somebody maybe at HR who was offended or who had actually picked up these two young men to victimize them for some reason. Because how do you even go to a point where you investigate people's private chat, like a WhatsApp group's chat, which is not anything to do with FNB? I mean, FNB doesn't own a WhatsApp group or create a WhatsApp group chat where they actually institute rules and regulations of how employees must communicate amongst each other. This is a social media platform. So it's a bit ridiculous. For us, our main interest and concern is the fact that we are confronted with a serious situation in South Africa that says that economic racism still continues. The four main big banks have no respect for any of the employees, have no respect for South Africa in terms of a constitutional democracy. And not only that, they are not even willing to improve the lives of their own workers, particularly the black workers in their banks. So we are quite perturbed and quite disturbed. And it's a situation that we are going to take up very strongly with the bank. And not only that, we are going to take it up with the investors of FNB as well as shareholders, because it's about time we take some of these matters to the highest level to ensure that our institutions that are benefiting in South Africa and making money out of our hard-earned labor become part of what we call good corporate citizens as well. Victimizing two people for an insinuous, emails over something that doesn't even make a difference. I mean, really, what difference will it make in the big, long scheme of things? These young people did not insult anybody. They just made a comment in passing. And as a result, they become penalized. Or maybe it was, show them a bit of a lesson and teach these young black people a lesson on how they should start conducting themselves. We feel it was very unfair. It was extremely discriminatory. And it goes to the basis that we still have a long way to literally transform South Africa, particularly economically, because racism already exists within the banks and they are still treating our black people from a racial point of view.
Now let's turn back to Mr. Simon Masimula, who is one of the ex-FNB employees who was sacked regarding this debacle. What is your response to the fact that Nchabeleng, who is from Transform RSA, he is in fact the president, says that he will be taking this matter further, involving lawyers and taking it up with the bank?
In fact, that is very interesting because that's something that's supposed to be done or have been done, in fact. Because, for instance, during the process of our cases, we had a BEC member, Branch Executive Committee member of the union, who is also part of FNB, who actually testifies against us, but that person is supposed to fight against transformation. In fact, she is head of transformation and supposed to push matters that relate to transformation, but she actually turned against us and testified against us in the inquiry.
That is very interesting indeed. Let's turn now to Mr. Jele. Regarding economic racism, which we heard from Adil and Nchabeleng, do you say that it still is perpetuated now, today, and you have felt it personally from FNB?
That's most definitely. For example, I'll just make you an example with our case also that FNB. Senior managers and operation managers were all white. And then it was only at the level of the strategic committee where you'll get mostly Indians, whites, and blacks. So it simply gives you a direct picture that we are economically not liberated as black people. And as an example, if FNB as a bank cared for its people, you will not even, in my wildest imagination, I've never imagined a bank that will want to discipline or victimize an employee who's saying, guys, we have a problem here. we do not even have one disabled employee in our building. It is a cause for concern and it needs to be addressed by the employees. So if you cared about South Africa, about human rights and about your employees, you will say, this person is actually building us. This person is actually contributing positively. Let's take what they are saying, whether it's criticism, but it's constructive criticism, and then let's run with it. There's nothing wrong about it.
Let's turn now to Professor Tebo Khadima, a political analyst here this evening. The sacked employees claim that they are being punished for freedom of expression. Obviously, there's a very fine line here, and how do we know, where to draw this line? And ultimately, the line has been drawn regarding FNB by firing these two employees. In your opinion, did they do the correct thing, or how should they have handled this situation? And is this seen as freedom of expression, or ultimately did they delve into their personal conversations and, invade their privacy ultimately?
Well, most certainly, I think the WhatsApp group chat that was then one within the group availed that to management. I just cannot see in terms of the loss of evidence how it was admissible, because certainly it is not admissible. If the members of that group knew that within that WhatsApp group confined space, that chat would then end up somewhere else, the question is that would they have been free to express themselves as so empowered by the Constitution? And the answer is no, because the risk was that much higher. But how the bank then found that to be admissible, it is perplexing. I mean, I just cannot understand how. That's the one thing. And certainly, I think it touches on the fundamental right, which is under Chapter 2 of our Constitution, freedom of expression, that we all so much cry about. And it is for that reason that we would believe that we've seen even, for example, a lot of people having a lot of things to say about matters political, despite or regardless of the positions that they hold within corporate South Africa. We just had the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, for example, where he made very preposterous allegations and accusations against the person of the president. And yet, this is somebody who represents corporate South Africa. This is somebody who would expect, in a short order of time, to have to sit in a meeting with the President of the Republic to talk about issues of mutual interest. The question is that how exactly would he relate? But what did we see? The member companies of Business Leadership South Africa, because they themselves are politicians, have seen nothing wrong with the conduct of their CEO, who effectively has brought all of them into disrepute. Now, the question that is that, was that freedom of expression, but in that capacity, wearing that cap as the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, or wearing the cap of CEO of First National Bank, it is a lot more aggravating for such a person to make such allegations, because they are bringing the organization into disrepute, than these two employees. So if anything here, they became a scapegoat. They were the weaker party that was easily attackable. The question that now must be, can First National Bank perhaps now sit back and say, well, what is it that we're going to do? Because I feel that corporate South Africa and most of the CEOs have become a little bit too arrogant, because for a long time they have not been challenged. In fact, we have not seen protest action, mass action against corporate South Africa since 1994. What we are seeing is mass action against the state and its organs, but not against corporate South Africa. Whereas pre-1994, in fact, those of us who lived in that era of apartheid, that is what we are accustomed to. That is where, for that reason, that even big corporates could not establish businesses in, for example, in largely black areas, because there would have been mass protest and sometimes it could have been violent. But what we are seeing now is a corporate South Africa that has become hostile, that has become a lot more buoyed, perhaps by the timidity of the state and the politicians, that now I think they've gone overboard. They are even trampling the constitution of this republic. And certainly what has happened to them in terms of really the laws of fairness and right to procedure or audi alteram, but also ensuring that the evidence that is presented against them can be admissible, can be tested, but not only that, can you quantify the harm that would have happened within a private setting, even though they were employees, but also, for example, the use of emails of the company or the address of the company by an employee on non-work-related issues. that always boils down to the head of human resources or human capital or whatever department that they call it, to say to what extent during induction of employees do they make it known to the employees in terms of the responsibility, in terms of the use of company emails for non-work related issues, but also how often do they train? Because here we are hearing now evidence that others are free to say whatever that could have been in the same circumstances, but no action was taken. Inconsistency, I can't see how FNB will hold course.
Indeed. Unfortunately, we do have to stop it there as we're running out of time, but we'd like to send our thanks out to Adil Inchabaleng, who's from Transform RSA, in fact, the president there, as well as Tepo Kadima, our political analyst, and then Simon Masimula, who is an ex-FNB employee, as well as CPC Klejele. Thank you so much for your time here. We really do appreciate it. Time now for a short break. We'll be back with more news and updates after this.